This next question sent to CornyDriveThru@gmail.com from Kenny in Cincinnati, Ohio. Today, as we are recording, October 5th, is the 23rd anniversary of Brian Pillman's death. Here in Cincinnati...
Oh my God, that's right.
Here in Cincinnati, he is a cult hero. It's so cool that his son, who looks just like him, is doing well on the indies. Just wanted to hear you tell some funny Pillman stories, because I know you have some.
Well, I have one that was my favorite one, but you can't tell it outside the locker room. People would have taken it wrong at this point, with all the things that had gone on today. But Brian, he was a perfect personality for wrestling. He was over the fucking top. He loved to fucking, tell jokes, play ribs, fuck around with people, fuck with people. Go out and have the matches. He loved to go out after the show. That's why Flair liked him. He should have been a horseman. He had that personality. I'm trying to think of a Brian Pillman story that I can tell on the air. And I keep going back to that. Oh, it's so fucking funny. I can't say it. Anyway, I loved Brian.
Why can't you say it? Like, I'm not telling you to say it, but what is the reason you say so much foul stuff?
Well, because, okay, I'll tell you, here's the thing. Nobody should think ill of Brian. But he come in one night and he's telling, because he and Stan used to compare stories, because Sweet Stan, he saw an up-and-comer here in Brian Pillman. So Brian comes in one night. He and Stan had been out somewhere. They'd got separated. They'd gone their separate ways. And he's telling a story. He went back to this young lady's apartment. And as he got in this young lady's apartment and he and the young lady got to the bedroom, he looked over in the corner of the bedroom and he noticed a crib. And in the corner of the crib was a baby. Not actually a baby. It was a toddler. He was old enough to stand up, but he's still in one of the playpen-like gimmicks, right? So what, 1.5 years, 2 years old? You're the child expert. I don't know. Just barely able to speak type of age. Because as the way Brian tells the story, he says, well, kids over there, oh, don't worry, everything's fine. So minutes later, he's behind this young lady in what they used to nominally refer to as the doggy style position. And she's selling like an auctioneer. And he looks over towards this crib and the kid is standing there like he's in jail with his fucking hands on the bars, peeping through the bars going, "Mother, no!" And Brian gave the kid a little wink and kept right on with what he was doing. Now, I don't know if the kid was old enough to speak, and if he was old enough to speak, if he would have called his mother, "Mother," but the look on Brian's face of satisfaction and the big smile when he said the kid screamed, "Mother, no!" has stuck with me all these years to this very day. I guess you had to be there. It was fucking hilarious when he told it.
Did Tom Zink ever get in on this action with Stan and Brian of comparing stories?
No, Tom was just over in the corner somewhere.
Come on.
I don't mean when it was happening. I mean in the locker room. I don't remember a single goddamn Tom Zink story. He was just always stoned over in the corner somewhere. I don't remember a single word that Tom Zink ever said to me, come to think of it.
What do you remember about when Pillman first came in the summer of '89?
Well, there was the hairdryer fiasco.
No, what's that?
Well, Brian comes in with that head of hair, right? And all the curly locks, and he's gorgeous, and he's got the fucking physique, and he's doing all the flying shit. And a lot of the guys were like, what the fuck? There was a little professional jealousy going on, but also since he was so new and nobody had ever heard of him and didn't know anything about him, he comes in and he's got one of those big diffusers on his blow dryer. Remember, it looked like a megaphone back in the 80s. They had those for the big hair where it diffused the blow drying. Do you remember that, or are you that old?
No, I do remember that, yeah.
Okay, well, anyway, after a week or two, he comes in one day and there in the locker room is his diffuser on his hair dryer, broken in several pieces. Because the guys were fucking with him because they're looking at this short guy, probably pretty muscles, but who knew if he knew how to use them? He's a rookie. He's just come in. They knew he had a pretty big contract, and now he's using a fucking hairdryer with a diffuser. That lasted the first couple of weeks until a couple of things happened. For one thing, Flair, as we've mentioned, took a liking to him. For another thing, guys started finding out more about Brian's background and realized that he fucking walked on to the goddamn Cincinnati Bengals. He walked on to fucking Miami of Ohio. The story when he got his college football tryout, he started playing football, but he was so small and undersized and didn't have that physique at that point. And he wanted to play major college ball, and everybody laughed at him. And he walked on at Miami of Ohio. And there were, I can't remember, but like, a couple of hundred prospective players there, including all the people that had the scholarships and all the people that they had, made a big deal out of and were going to start and be their star players. Brian came in third in the tryouts, and the coach said he compared the performance to a Tasmanian devil. Brian basically was one of the toughest guys in the locker room, not in terms of an collegiate shoot wrestling or being an NCAA wrestling champion like a Jack Briscoe, but just in terms of he would kick the shit out of some fucker. And he had always overachieved. And once that they started finding out, not only being around Brian, because he got over with guys after he was around guys, but they started not only finding out he was an okay guy and what a worker he was in the ring, but also as they found out more about his backstory, they found out that if he wanted to, he could have kicked shit out of almost anybody that in the locker room, and they started treating him much nicer after that. But it was just a herky-jerky little introductory period. Who is this guy? Is a pretty boy. Where's he come from? And then they found out that he could fucking out-hoss all of them. So it was easier after that.
Did Flair like him right away?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I didn't know at the time to monitor the situation to check and see who liked Brian Pillman. I was excited that he had come in because I was one of the few people that actually got Calgary tapes. Few people in the business. All the fans got Calgary tapes back then. Very few people in the business paid any attention. So I was excited he was there to begin with because I had seen him. He fit in the ring and in the locker room and outside, the ring with the guys. So it didn't take long. And he was the star of the team of him and Zink. And as we've talked about that whole angle that they cut off with the Midnight and Pillman and Zink before. But, that's why Flair wanted to have that match with him on the Saturday night TBS show that ended up doing the highest rating of a Saturday night TBS show in like the previous 3 years. And that's in that case, that's where I think they went like between 15 and 20 minutes, and Pillman took him to the limit. And it meant something because you didn't see that constantly every week like you do now. The number one star in the business going 20 minutes with an underneath guy. When that happened, automatically you knew, shit, this guy's a new star. Now it's just like, when will this thing be over with? But Flair specifically that week, he said, the main event's me and Pillman. Fill the rest of it in to me and Kevin. I said, okay, very good.
What did you think when you first started seeing what would become the loose cannon gimmick?
I liked it because I knew that Flying Brian, the smiling baby face, he had a great smile and a great face for it, but that wasn't really Brian. Brian was a shit disturber, and Brian liked to, fuck with people in a fun way, in a good way. But Brian was a personality, and he wasn't just a smiling baby face. And as he got older and evolved more, and he dropped some of the weight. It was before his accident, so he could move around a little better, but he started wearing the punk rock clothes and having the wide eyes and the stringy hair. That was main event level material. So Flying Brian would have been a great baby face. He could have been in a steamboat level position in the territories, a guy like that. But Brian Pillman, the loose cannon, was more contemporary for the mid 90s, even ahead of his time for the 90s. And as a heel, he could do so much more. And he had such a great promo. So I loved it. I used to tape the WCW programs, even when I was still living in Tennessee and doing Smoky Mountain Wrestling, and I'd zip through just to see what was going on, because sometimes some of my guys would go there, or I would get, somebody when they were done with them. So I was keeping an eye on it, and I still have the VHS tape, the night that Pillman made Bobby Heenan say fuck on TV. I watched it back. I was like, oh, shit. Because even Bobby didn't know whether or not Pillman was crazy or not, and he was fucking with his bad neck, and he just blurted it out without thinking. But I knew Brian wasn't. I knew he was crazy. I knew he was always crazy, but I knew at that time he wasn't any crazier than he'd always been, because I knew, the way Brian thought, and I said, this is a great gimmick. And plus, he was working with Kevin, and I'd known Kevin for so long. I knew if some of the things that were presented were really that way, Kevin wouldn't be fucking working with him, right? But they did a good job of making most people believe it, including, apparently, as we found out, Nancy's sister believed that Kevin was doing all these shoots with Benoit and Pillman and everybody else during that time period. She bought it. But they were trying to blur the lines of, people were starting to figure out on a widespread basis that it was a work. And so they were trying to take him back in the other direction. And Brian was the best guy in the business at doing that. He even a bunch of the boys thought that he'd really lost his fucking mind. And toward the end of it there, there was something to that. But when he was the loose cannon in WCW and then suckering Bischoff into giving him the release so that they could make it believable and all that stuff, so that he could make Vince or Bischoff bid against Vince, he was in full possession of his faculties. Then it was all a fucking work. It just, a lot of the boys didn't even know it. He would call me every once in a while in Knoxville when he would hear me. Remember Earl Owens, who was on the radio in Manchester, Kentucky, in our Eastern Kentucky territory, and he would do a lot of promos for the matches, and I'd do call-ins with him all the time. Brian would drive a lot from Atlanta, where he was living, up to Cincinnati and back again, and driving through Eastern Kentucky, sometimes he'd hear those radio spots, and he'd call crowing about something I'd said about the poor food stamp coupon clipping, black lung residents of Eastern Kentucky. And he loved verbal shit where you just get to the fucking meat of the matter and rip somebody. And he could do it. The first time he met Vince at that NAPTY convention, he comes up before selfies were a thing. He fucking come, hey, Vince, hey, how you doing? He's hugging all over him, getting a selfie taken. Vince thought he was fucking crazy. And JR or somebody had to tell him, no, that's just the best gimmick in the business.
Isn't a story, too, that he ran it as he was going in, Meltzer was coming out, and they knew each other for years. And he took Dave's pass. So he went up to Vince with a pass on him that said Dave Meltzer.
Yes, it said Dave Meltzer.
What did you think of, because I know I think you even had an 8-man tag match with them. So I don't know how much you saw throughout the rest of that period in 93 they were together. What'd you think of the Hollywood Blondes? Did they get broken up too early?
Of course. I loved them. And you can't say that either guy suffered because the Blondes were broken up, because Austin went on to be the biggest star in the business and Brian went on to be much bigger than he was as a Blonde. But they were a great tag team, and they liked tag team wrestling, and they knew how to fucking work, and they made the WCW show watchable. And yes, we had an 8-man tag. We went in while Watts was there and did the Rock and Roll and Heavenly Bodies match and the Smoky Mountain Wrestling invasion thing. One of the matches we had was Shane Douglas and Ricky Steamboat and the Rock and Roll Express against Austin, Pillman, and the Heavenly Bodies. And that was actually one of the better WCW TV matches of that time period, because all those guys knew how to work with each other and wanted to, and were motivated. And it was a little embarrassing for Steamboat and Shane because they were their tag team champions at the time, and the people were chanting rock and roll for the part-time guys, but they were, legends and had come back, and, that's the way things go. But it was fun working with them, and I loved, that's the one thing I would zip through the WCW shows, but I would watch anything with Flair in its entirety, anything with the Hollywood Blondes speaking, working, whatever, because they could have worked the Carolinas. They could have worked any territory as a team, and they would have been fantastic.